So I see some familiar faces that have been speaking before on this panel. So I will hand over to you. So from rules to results, strengthening the DSA ecosystem in practice. Louis Victor, CEO of Louis Victor de Fransu, sorry, CEO of Tremo and founder of Tremo will be the moderator. So I will hand over. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's sorry. Yes. And I'm not even reading properly. Yes, usually the sponsors are the moderators, but not in this case. My full apologies. So I will hand over to you, Flor. So you are the director of platform supervision of the Irish regulator. So in Dublin. So I will hand over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, I have. Thank you very much, Jose. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend this session. I know it's nearly the end of afternoon, but I promise we're going to make it engaging and interesting because I have a really good panel here with me. Talking about the DSA, it's an ever-evolving system that brings lots of diverse community, and we have different actors in the DSA. You have, of course, the platforms, you have the regulators, but you have also civil society, researcher, out-of-course body, settlement bodies, and then the trusted flagger, and of course, the user, which really play a vital role in promoting the transparency, accountability, and digital safety under the Digital Safety Act. As we are now little bit more than 2 years since the implementation of the DSA. There is more responsibility, there is more little steps that have become, and it makes it apparent that, you know, collaboration is really necessary in this ecosystem. So I have here a few panelists. So you will see some have trusted flaggers, some are out-of-court settlement bodies, and then we have also Tremo, who's really supporting some of the online services to adapt to the regulatory framework. I know I'm the moderator. I'm also part of the actor of the DSA because I'm also, as Jose say, the Irish regulator, Commissioner Mine. I know my accent doesn't really say it, but I might intervene a bit in the discussion. But first of all, I want to present our great panel. So we have Louis Victor de Fransu from Tremo. So he's a co-founder and CEO of Tremo. We have Joséphine Ballon here, who is from 8Head. We have also Niklas Heder from User Rights. And we were supposed to have Lydia from the European Commission, but due to illness, she will not be here with us today. But that's okay. We have good panelists here. So I will start really to ask the first question, and maybe that each of you explain actually your role of your what role your organization should play in the DSA ecosystem. So I will start maybe with you, Niklas.
Do you want to start, Joséphine? Maybe then it's easier for me.
No.
Okay.
I'll ask you first.
So we're an out-of-court dispute settlement body, which is a long word. Sometimes I try to describe it briefly as some sort of a private court for content moderation disputes. We're certified under Article 21 of the DSA. In order to be certified, we had to show our expertise and our independence. Independence from platforms, independence from anyone else. The idea is really that there are a lot of disputes around what kind of content moderation decisions by platforms are correct, what is not correct, what content should go down and what should not go down, and that people have rights when it comes to that. They can contest, they can challenge decisions by platforms, because these decisions by platforms need to be rule-based, they need to be based on terms and conditions or based on the law. When a platform, for example, claims that your post violates a particular law or violates the hate speech policy, they have to justify that, and then you have rights in order to protest that. You basically have a remedy. And then you have different kinds of remedies. One is that you go to the platform itself and you complain to the platform and you say, you know, I disagree with this. Could you have another look at it, so that they hopefully look at it a bit more thoroughly? That's one way. And then there's a second way, which is that you can also go to courts, right? You can go to a court and you can challenge a decision by a platform. You can claim, you know, that they violated your rights. You want the court to review it in great detail, and then through that try to really realize your rights. And then the regulator, I think, realized that neither of these options are really ideal. Going to the platform who made the original decision might often be quite ineffective, because they might just take the same decision again, and they're also not impartial then in that sense. Going to court is simply too complicated. It's too expensive and it takes too long. So basically, let's try and create some mechanism that is in the middle, that is accessible, and that provides a real means for users to rely on their rights without having to rely on platforms or without having to rely on courts. So basically, instead of going to a court, or even instead of going to the platform or after going to the platform, you can submit a case to us. We call it user rights. We're certified in Germany, basically across Europe. And then you provide information regarding the particular problem that you have. And that can either be that your content got removed or demoted, or your account got banned. And then you provide information on that. Or you show that you have reported content that you think violates rules or violates the law, and platforms have decided not to remove it, and you think really they should remove it, then you can also contest that decision and bring that case to us. What we do then is we go to the platform, we say we have a complaint regarding this specific piece of content. What is your version of the story? Why did you take a particular decision? What is your reasoning for it? And can you share with us the relevant content that this dispute is about? Then platforms, share that information with us, ideally, and then we pass that case to our independent reviewers, and then they make a legal assessment of the case. They look at all the information that is out there, they analyze the facts of the case and the law, and then they make a decision, and then they share that decision with the platform and with the complainants. And then that decision can either be in favor of the platform, saying actually they did everything right, that nothing else needs to happen pretty much, or it can be in favor of the complainant, saying, the platform got it wrong. Really, they shouldn't have removed your content, or really, they should have removed the content that you have posted. And then this decision that we make is non-binding. There's an obligation of the platform to engage in good faith in the process. The individual decision as such is non-binding, but also as part of this bigger obligation to engage in good faith with us, we do request from the platform, like, did you implement our decision? And if not, like, what are the reasons for not doing that? And then through that, hope to resolve the case.
Thank you. Josephine?
Yeah, so Hate Aid is a human rights organization that supports victims of online violence. So we always have the user perspective, and especially the perspective of those affected from online violence on online platforms. And during the DSA negotiations, Hate Aid was advocating very strongly for user rights in the Digital Services Act, not this user rights, but like user rights in general. And because they were like not in the draft from the very beginning, there were many things that had to be renegotiated because they were just overlooked, because there was a very strong focus on restoring content that was removed wrongly. So this was the first role that we had. Then the DSA came into effect. Then, I was part of the advisory board of the DSC in Germany. Then we also did a project where we actually tested the user rights in the DSA. This just came to a conclusion at the end of last year. It was a 2-year project. And in the meantime, we became a certified trusted flagger, which means that we have an official role in the Digital Services Act to flag content, illegal content, of course, and have the right to ask for prioritized assessment of what happens. But of course, we cannot remove content. We can also not tell the platforms to remove content. The only thing that we can ask for is a proper assessment. Personally, I think it's very sad that we need the Trusted Flagger instrument in the Digital Services Act, because in my opinion, every report should be treated the same, should be treated as fast as possible and also as proper as possible. But unfortunately, this is not the case. And this was the experience for many years, which is why it was decided to codify the Trusted Flagger status for the very first time. It was very hard to become a Trusted Flagger. It took us 8 months. With the German DSC, we had to give a lot of transparency, which is like not the problem, but like I even had to give the grades of my employees over to the to the regulator. Yeah, because they wanted to see everything to assess our qualification. And now we are a Trusted Flagger organization since June last year. And we already started to do a bit and also published our first report today. Maybe I can go a bit more into detail later. But the experience so far is mixed. So yeah, unfortunately, we obviously need this instrument, although we shouldn't. But still, there are some flaws.
Thank you. Come back to that later and see your report.
Thank you very much. I'm CEO of Tremo, a trust and safety solution provider, and we actually sit in between, if I can say, the Trusted Flaggers and the out-of-court dispute bodies, because we work with online platforms of all shapes, from the smallest to some of the biggest, providing them the technology and the services, the consulting services to help them improve their moderation services. One of the things we saw when we started working at Tremo is a lot of these platforms, and I'm not working with, I'm not a representation of online platforms. That's quite clear, in the sense that we saw a lot of these systems were based on legacy systems. There were sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 different tools being used by service providers for content moderation. They were using some sort of CRM, some sort of detection tool, some multiple detection tools, one for audio, one for video, one for chats, etc. And in fact, it made the entire process very cumbersome, very slow, very human intensive, in the sense that therefore it wasn't able to scale and match the sheer volume. This was actually somewhat similar to from the biggest platforms to some of the smallest platforms. And so we launched Tremo with this objective of saying, how can we help and provide a tool to actually optimize the process and make it as transparent as possible? I think that was kind of the very core of Tremo when we first launched. Is how can we, that actually was the starting point, is how can we automate transparency reporting? Because if you want to fight against online violence, online hate speech, but at the same time, counter some of disinformation. There was a few talks today around disinformation, misinformation, and how they fuel online conspiracies, conspiracies in general, by the way. And how can you do this in a way that's as transparent as possible? And that requires the right tools, it requires the right investments, it requires the right technology and the right operational model as well. And that's what we created at Tremo about 4 years ago. We're now 40 people spread across Europe. And as I said, we have both the technology and the service line, and we've worked with close to 40 different platforms, from some of the smallest in the world, launching startups that want to help scale their moderation operations from day one, to some of the largest that realize that they need external help to be able to comply and to be more transparent.
Thank you. Before we start to talk maybe more about collaboration, challenge, success, I think that would be really interesting, and we talk about reports. I think last year when we were here, it was just, some of you were just starting to be certified, and I think maybe for the audience, it will be interesting to see what you have observed in the last year. So maybe if you would like to share. Niklas, I'm sorry, just beside me, that's going to be you again. I know you have some slides you wanted to share with the audience. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, so very glad to share some slides. We also just published our transparency report like a week ago, and it's been a pretty heavy lift for us because we're reporting on all cases that we received in the first year. And that has been over 8,000 cases. Thank you. And that first year was, of course, also characterized by us really like building the operations, building the processes in which we work, trying to build the technology that we use in order to process all of these cases, which also meant that the data points for all of the cases, you know, were quite dynamic. So it was a bit of an extra effort to try and be able to report in a consistent way about all of these cases. For us, it was super important to do that because what we also try to do at User Rights is not only to build us out as an organization, but to more broadly help develop the field of out-of-court dispute settlement. Like, what is it? What is it supposed to be? What does it take for it to be effective, and so forth? And that is really the objective of this report, to just try and be as transparent as possible about like what works and also about what doesn't work, and then from that hopefully also draw conclusions of what needs to happen for it to work better in the future. So yeah, what you can see here, yeah. Oh yeah, great. So you can see we have received around 8,500 cases in the first year. Around half of these cases were admissible. A lot of them are also not admissible because not all sorts of content moderation decisions under the DSA are admissible. It's only those decisions that relate to information shared on the platform. There's other moderation decisions which relate to other sorts of behavior, which probably doesn't fall under the DSA. It's also still something where we try to get more regulatory guidance in order to better understand when is a dispute in scope and when is it not in scope. But that explains pretty much that discrepancy. What you see here is the development of cases over the year. You can see it started relatively moderately, for which we were very grateful. At User Rights, we didn't communicate much about it in the beginning because it was pretty much a self-funded project, and we started with 2 people at the beginning of last year. By now we're over 20 people, but so we clearly also needed time to kind of like build out the operations and be able to deliver on these sort of like all of these cases with a high quality. But then we really saw a big increase towards the end of the year. This shows the distribution of cases based on the case category. So we receive cases that refer to restrictions, that is the blue line. Restrictions meaning that your own content got restricted, got removed, or whatnot for being hate speech, for example. And red is this is the category relating to reporters, like reporters submitting cases to platforms and then this content not being removed. So that went up significantly. In terms of regions from where we got cases, the biggest is Germany, and then it's France. And then there's also cases from everywhere in the European Union, but significantly less, which of course also has to do with us being an organization based in Germany, which means that just most people in Germany, like they might know us, but we still have to work towards more visibility across Europe. Now, when it comes to the outcome of cases, this slide shows when disputes, in how many percent disputes are resolved successfully. And so the question is for us, like, what does it even mean? You know, when is a dispute resolution process successful? And we have different metrics for that. This first metric basically shows success is defined as when the ultimate treatment of the content aligns with what we think should be the outcome of the case. So for example, if we find that the content should be removed and it was removed, then that's a success. If we find that the platform was right in its original decision, then that is also a successful outcome of the dispute. There's no need to implement this. So we think this is a fair measure for kind of like an institutional success metric for an independent organization. And you can see here that the success rate with TikTok is very high, where the success rate with Instagram and Facebook particularly is very low. There are also other metrics which are important, I think, to measure the impact of out-of-court dispute settlement. This metric describes the effective resolution rate from the perspective of the user. Basically, how often do they get what they want? If they, for example, come with us with a complaint and say, my post got removed, it shouldn't have been removed, how often is it then actually restored? Or if you report something and originally it hasn't been removed, how often is it removed in the end? By the way, I did have titles and explanations a bit more on these slides. I don't know where they ended up, but I'm glad that I can explain it anyway. I hope it's clear. This is an overview on how often we decide a dispute in favor of the complainant? How often do we think that the complainants that come to us are actually right? And here you can see that this is pretty high across platforms. It's not necessarily an indicator for how well the content moderation works for these platforms. It's an indicator for how often the people that come to us and manage to submit a case and so forth, like how often, you know, is it really justified that they should be doing this? And this final rate here is about the implementation of decisions when we decide against a platform. So here you can see that this rate is still relatively low. For TikTok, it's higher than compared to other platforms, but in general, it's still a relatively low rate. The reason why the process is still, more often successful than this is because often platforms, particularly TikTok, they look at a case when we submit it to them in the first instance, and they re-review their own decisions, and then they already basically say, you know what, we got it wrong, we're going to correct the decision. Either they're going to remove the content or they're going to restore the content. And then the dispute resolution process is already resolved. That's in over 50% of the cases with TikTok. In those cases where this is not the case and we decide against the platform, then these are the rates on how often they ultimately implement the decision. For all the data and to get a clearer overview, you can look into the transparency report and you'll see I think the main takeaway that you will see is that the effectiveness and the success of this mechanism really varies depending on how platforms work with us, and that with some platforms, especially with TikTok, we're very successful, and with other platforms, especially with Meta's platforms, we're not being very successful at all. Which then I think can also lead us to a discussion around what needs to happen for that to be more effective. We have more nice, fancy slides in our transparency report that I think you can look at in greater detail. But I also don't want to occupy too much time now and maybe pass it on to Josefina.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I finished our report yesterday in the evening, so I had no time to create some slides, but I think I can give you the most interesting points from our experience as a trusted flagger, also without fancy stuff. So in the last year, we reported 420 pieces of illegal content, and we found that over all the platforms, which is of course social media platforms, but also Google image search and porn platforms, 61% were removed. So this sounds very little, but we have to say that in 25% of the reports, we did not even receive a reply, which was mainly, but not only, due to the porn platforms that did not react to our reportings, because it's small porn platforms and we mostly reported image-based sexual abuse on these platforms. Also, YouTube didn't reply in a couple of cases, which is consequent to our prior assessment that I was talking about earlier before we became a trusted flagger organization. And we also found a few interesting things, for example, that in many cases platforms basically overcomplied because we reported something as illegal under the German law, and they removed it not only in Germany with geo-blocking, but all over the world because of a violation of their community standards. So this was quite interesting, and we also saw that the reply times, they were also varying a lot. Like we had, again, consequently, to our previous reports, very fast replies from X, where it was like only 2 hours or something. But also Meta was really fast with under 24 hours in many cases. So this was really surprising, and on the other platforms it was like really varying, which can also be a good sign because it can mean that there is an actual human assessment of the cases and it's not automated. So it's not always bad if they take a little bit more time, but of course it shouldn't be too long. Yeah, so like these are the main interesting findings from our report, but we also looked a bit more into detail on how platforms deal with the trusted flagger status, because in Germany there are a lot of conspiracy theories about trusted flaggers, and we hope to create a bit of a counterbalance by giving information. And so we also included, for example, screenshots of the reporting channels, because some platforms, especially Meta, which is surprising because in your numbers they didn't perform so well. They have like a specific portal for trusted flagger organizations, which makes it very easy to track the reportings. While others didn't do that. For example, on Google, you are just referred to a publicly visible forum, and you can choose that you are a trusted flagger, but the only verification that you are actually a trusted flagger is done by the email address that you use. So yeah, these are a few interesting observations, and of course the report is not a policy paper. So we really restricted ourselves to the objective observations, but maybe there will be a policy paper afterwards about what to improve, because we think, like I said it before, there was a very burdensome process with 8 months of investigations by the regulator before that, and we were also asked that reports can only be done by lawyers, so by people that actually studied law with a degree, which is not the same, not the same standard that we have with the platforms that actually have the power to remove content and not only report it for assessment. And this is why we think that platforms should also take this seriously. But overall, despite all the flaws, we find that the trusted flagging instrument is useful, because the removal rate is higher than in our previous reports where we did the assessments without being a trusted flagger, which is important for us because we are still a consultation center, and 85% of the reports came from exactly this victims counseling that we are doing. So it's important for us to actually have something to give to them. So like where we can credibly say, okay, you tried to remove this content and you were unsuccessful, but we have a tool that we can actually try. So yeah, overall, it works in most of the cases, but there are still some things that we should improve.
Listening to Nicholas and Josephine, I can't stop thinking that this was actually one of the big successes of the DSA, right? When the DSA was first created and negotiated, one of the things that we were really pushing for is more transparency. How can transparency improve the overall moderation effectiveness and accountability of the online platforms, both in terms of making sure they actually do respond to victims in a way that's faster, but also making sure that the moderation decisions they take are more accurate, right? They don't just decide to shadow ban you and never tell you about it, or they don't remove the content without explaining why they remove the content, or giving other means of through out-of-court dispute bodies of challenging, but also being able to be held accountable. What you're saying around, this platform isn't responding in that way, and we're seeing that they don't respond to us. So Josephine, what you've identified with Hate Aid is really important information to make the overall ecosystem much better and much safer. On our side, we've worked with a number of platforms in trying for them to build their transparency reports. As you know, the transparency report requirements for platforms under the DSA are quite challenging. I think it's a very good thing in the sense that because it goes into a very high level of details, but it's not an easy thing to do. If the platforms don't have the right systems, they don't have the right tools to do so, or are not tracking the data in the right way, then there's a lot of manual work, a lot of that to map all the different actions, to go back in databases, to go and try and identify what are the data points that need to be shared. There's been quite a lot of transparency reports already issued under the DSA, and we look, especially, and it's the first time they're using the first template, which enables us also to compare the way different platforms are responding, the average response time, etc.
Yeah, thank you. I think that for me, like the also having these reports now, so when we talk about how we collaborate, how we cooperate, so it has to be useful for everyone. So as you say, as regulator, for me that's going to be really useful to understand maybe and then engage with some of the platform, asking questions, see what maybe the different, where there is so much friction. In some issue, for example, with trusted flagger, as you say, how we can report. I imagine that some of there'll be more awareness about the ODS, so you might get more numbers. We might get a little bit even more data around how things are done. I think for us, regulator, and especially under the European Board of Digital Services and all these working group, and especially the one that deals with trusted flagger and the ODS body, how we can support also that things works well with the service provider, but also harmonization that, there is, and that's the aim of the European Board of Digital Services, is to bring kind of harmonization in enforcement and compliance with the DSA. What is really, so I understand some of the challenges you have went through. Is there anything else that maybe you would like to see, or would like, how can you maybe both cooperate? How can you cooperate with maybe, and I know there is, for example, a partnership between Tremo and user rights, how we make sure that the ecosystem is an ecosystem there is dialogue, communication, transparency. So maybe Victor, Nicolas, if you want to speak about your partnership, I think that would be interesting for the audience.
Thanks, Nicholas. So, as you were saying, users can come to you when they disagree with the moderation decision from the platforms, and then you exchange user rights exchanges with the platforms, and there's a number of exchanges of information that needs to happen. That exchange of information can be done through emails, or can be done through some of those tools, or could also be done through better means and better technology that actually is, safer. There's less issues around data protection, but also makes it easier for organizations, ODS bodies, user rights, but or the others as well, to speak and to exchange with the platforms. And that's the level of cooperation that we wanted to build with user rights as a first partnership, and working into trying to build a mechanisms for ODS bodies and platforms to be able to exchange and to work together in the most constructive way possible. One of the reasons we work with this is because we have more than a dozen platforms using our technology today, and therefore it could make a lot of sense that they directly and enable user rights to actually exchange and request information from those platforms when needed.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think one of the really interesting things about the DSA is that it does not just put the ball into the court of regulators and say, implementation of DSA is only done by regulators, and now they have to work in all these different ways and everything is going to be fine. Basically, what it does is it creates this ecosystem of different kinds of organizations that have a specific role, which I think makes a lot of sense, because these organizations have different dynamics, different bits of expertise, and can make different kinds of contributions. And I think that's why for us it was quite natural to sit down together and to see, what is your role, what is your expertise, what is our role. And I think with Louis Victor and Tremo, we already have one very specific kind of organization that has a special expertise when it comes to, supporting in some compliance areas and so forth. And with Joseph and Hate, that plays a very important role. And with us, it's a new sort of organization that somehow also comes there. And we can just act differently, we can grow differently, we can contribute something different of what regulators do. We can be really fast and we can develop very swiftly, and we can try to build partnerships, and through that also make some sort of contribution in the implementation of the regulation, without also being in the same way constrained in ways that the regulator is also constrained. And I think that is kind of what's sort of genius about the DSA, but it also to a certain extent then stands and falls with whether this ecosystem and these players are sufficiently enabled. And we, for example, we rely on platforms cooperating with us. We have absolutely no funding except for the fees that we can charge to platforms. They don't want to have to work with us. They have to pay these fees. They have to work with us. And we refuse to sign any sort of service provider contract with platforms because we said as soon as we sign it, we lose our independence, so we're not going to do it. But still, they have to pay for us and they have to work with us in cases, and they only do that if there is a sufficient incentive for them to do that. And there can be many different kinds of incentives. It can be an incentive that they think, you know what, user rights is going around, they're also going to speak about us, and maybe, you know, then hear Niklas sitting at this panel and saying, oh, TikTok is doing great in this particular aspect of compliance. Maybe that's a win for them, maybe. There also needs to be a regulatory expectation that platforms feel that if they don't do that there are going to be consequences. Like what we now want to do is we want to push all platforms up to those that are currently working with us in the most productive way, rather than see others drop further down because they look at it and they see when platforms don't comply in the same way, nothing happens, you know. And that's why now we are very actively going to regulators also, and we say, you know, basically whether all of this is going to work or not now depends also on the regulator setting clear expectations. And that's also really our focus pretty much for this year.
Thank you. Josephine, on the Trusted Flagger side, you share the same concern or same hope, or having regulators stepping a little bit more if things are not working the way they should be? Or
I think I can say, not only for us, but also for other civil society organizations, that we are taken very seriously by regulators from the very beginning. Even before the DSA came into effect, we were approached by regulators asking, what is your expertise? What data do you have? And I think they understood from the very beginning how important it is to have all the stakeholders in the ecosystem on board. But I would like to stress something else here. When the DSA came with high promises of transparency. And in the beginning, when there was no ODS body yet, no trusted flagger yet, and also no data access yet, we had to recognize that the transparency promise falls short. Because the only data that we get is transparency reports from platforms that show a lot about the quantity of content moderation, but nothing about how the algorithms work, how the quality actually works. So this was the first thing that we saw. Then the first risk assessment reports were published. And we found, okay, well, I mean, this is the least minimum, but it's not like really more, and we don't know really what to do with it. And so this is also something that we had to just acknowledge. And these reports and also the data access for independent researchers are the only transparency tools in the DSA that can give us independent data that is not coming from the platforms where we have to believe what we see because they give it to us. And that's why I think it's very important to have this ecosystem, and also to like not work together, but to be in an exchange, to also see how we can improve in this role, but of course also to push regulators, which is sometimes very frustrating from our perspective, because in the course of the first 2 years of the DSA, Hate Aid filed a lot of complaints because of DSA violations. This was not about we reported some content and it was not removed. It was about that platforms have no user-friendly reporting channels, that there are systemic failures in content moderation, and how the user rights are applied. And yeah, of course, there's only one fine yet. So there are so many proceedings going on in the European Commission. Like, it feels like nothing really happened. Like when you just look at the results and what you can feel, and this can be really frustrating for us, because like we do all the work and then we don't see the results, we don't see the consequences. But of course, this doesn't mean that we don't feel taken seriously. I said that in the beginning, but it also it means that we all have a bit patience with this law, and that we can just hope for the best. And in this whole transatlantic thing that we are in right now, where we know that there was proceedings delayed because of tariff negotiations with the US, which should not even be a topic at all in the enforcement of platform regulation, but it still is. We are happy when there's actually something happening soon, and also it shows that you also have to protect the ecosystem, because there's also a lot of pressure on, for instance, trusted flaggers who are under the radar worldwide.
Thank you so much. Putting my regulator hat, which I hope I can also. I would say that things, and I know I repeat it, but I think we see more and more outcomes. Things takes time, and I think everything we received and everything is evidence and risk-based. He's looked at. It's just that there is so many also, and there is also, you have to be just to advance it, there is lots of steps and it's lots of procedure, and it really takes time. We've seen some outcome. There is some things that have been, and us as the Irish regulator, we have opened some investigation. We are, working on different matters. So I know last time I said, you see next year, and then I can say again, we see again next year, there will be more. But how we manage also, there is a complaint, but there is also the report the CSO also are giving. So how maybe we take them a little bit separately and make sure there is a path maybe for the information sent by the CSO. So nothing is perfect, I fully agree, and I think more and more there is lesson learned, and more we can hopefully straighten how we enforce the DSA. Louis-Victor, you wanted to add something maybe?
One thing I wanted to add on this is beyond the regulators and beyond, also we tend to focus a lot on the very, very big platforms. But what I found quite interesting in around the DSA and around some of these regulations, it's not only the DSA, where you also have the UK, you have Australia, you have Singapore, there are a number of other jurisdictions that are pushing a lot of these regulations. It's how these middle platforms are also shifting, and the bar has shifted quite considerably. If you look at how moderation was taken in these companies 2-3 years ago, and again, I was speaking about some legacy system, but very little investment. It wasn't an area where a lot of management were thinking that this was something that was worthwhile. It was more seen as a cost center. Some of you here were also in a conference in London last week, and all of the discussions were around, the best practices that are coming out of the industry. How is trust and safety also transforming and becoming an industry and a discipline in by itself, right? Where there's actually research, there's cross-company sharing, there's best practices. Never as fast as we want it. It can always be better, and it will always continue. We hope we can always continue to improve, but how far the research and the sharing across companies has come in the past 3 to 4 years is quite incredible, and it wouldn't have happened without, I don't think it would have happened without the regulatory pressure that's coming out in Europe, but also across many other jurisdictions.
So I think we still have 5 minutes, so 2, 3. I will, and thank you, and I really hope you keep pushing us to do better. So my last question for all of you is that what would you like to see in the future? What you would like to see?
Concretely, we are working with all the other out-of-court dispute settlement bodies at the moment, and we have a list, which is a relatively long list, where we request regulatory guidance. Questions where we need to figure out in more detail what the law means, and often that is also against the background that platforms have a different opinion regarding what it means compared to us. So we need a baseline from the regulator to know, what's right, and then to be able to push through that. So I think that's very concretely what we are looking at.
Thank you. It is noted. Josephine?
I would like to see that we don't need trusted flagger organizations anymore, because all the user complaints are taken seriously by platforms and are handled professionally, maybe due to your tools or whatever. Actually, I don't care how they do it, but I think the responsibility is at the online platforms and should not be in the hands of social media platforms that are not even paid to do this job. But yes, this is one thing that I would like to see, and I would like to see more enforcement of the DSA, because there are some other violations that are quite clear, and where I think that enforcement is the only tool to show that we are seriously about digital sovereignty in the European Union, and that we cannot be blackmailed with threats from the other side of the Atlantic.
Thank you.
Thank you. And part of the reason we wanted to have this panel of the different actors is one of the things we really, or I really want to look and see more of, is the cooperation across the sectors of this ecosystem and all the different actors here. And of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, transparency. That for me, it's the most important, to hold all the different stakeholders accountable of the decisions they make in moderation and keeping everybody safe and online.
Thank you very much. Maybe next year we'll have also vetted researcher and maybe platform the user. That will be also interesting. Thank you so much for being a great audience and listening to events. Thank you to the panel. It was a really interesting conversation, and I wish you a very nice evening. Thank you.